February 22, 1980. Lake Placid, New York. Olympic Center Arena. 20 amateur hockey players, average age 22, sat in their locker room preparing to face the Soviet Union national team, a squad that had won 4 consecutive Olympic gold medals and had not lost an Olympic hockey game since 1968. The Soviets had destroyed the Americans 10-3 in an exhibition game at Madison Square Garden just 3 weeks earlier. Las Vegas wouldn't even set odds on the game because the outcome seemed so certain. The Soviet Union, featuring professional players with decades of international experience, was expected to win their 5th straight gold medal. The Americans, a collection of college kids and minor leaguers, were given no chance. But as team captain Mike Eruzione taped his stick and looked around the room, he saw something different than 3 weeks earlier. These weren't the same intimidated kids who'd been embarrassed in New York. His teammates' eyes showed determination, confidence, even belief. Their coach, Herb Brooks, had spent 6 months breaking them down and rebuilding them into something nobody expected. Brooks had made them hate him. He'd pushed them beyond their limits with brutal conditioning drills that left grown men crying on the ice. He'd deliberately created conflict, refusing to let players from rival colleges form cliques, forcing them to unite against their common enemy, him. Minutes before they would take the ice, Brooks stood before his team and delivered words that would echo through sports history. "You were born to be here. This moment is yours." Within 60 minutes, the Americans would defeat the Soviet Union 4-3 in what Sports Illustrated would name the greatest sports moment of the 20th century. The game would transcend hockey, becoming a cultural phenomenon that gave a struggling nation something to believe in during one of its darkest periods. ABC announcer Al Michaels would deliver his legendary call, "Do you believe in miracles? Yes." And millions of American households would watch the tape-delayed broadcast, the largest television audience ever for a hockey game in the United States. This is the story of how a coach who was cut from the 1960 Olympic team 1 week before the Games created a team that accomplished what he never could. How 20 college kids with an average age of 22 defeated the most dominant hockey program in history. How a brutal 6-month training camp featuring infamous Herbies skating drills forged a team conditioned better than even the Soviets, and why February 22, 1980 remains the most improbable upset in Olympic history 45 years later. Herbert Paul Brooks was born August 5, 1937, in St. Paul, Minnesota, into a hockey-obsessed family. His father, Herbert Sr., had been a player, and young Herb grew up on frozen ponds, skating before he could walk steadily. Minnesota in the 40s and 50s was hockey country, where kids learned to skate the way other American children learned to ride bikes. Brooks attended Johnson High School in St. Paul, where he starred on the hockey team that won the 1955 state championship. He scored 2 goals in the championship game, already showing the competitive fire that would define his life. He went to the University of Minnesota to play for legendary coach John Mariucci, becoming a skilled forward known more for his hockey intelligence than raw talent. In 1960, at age 22, Brooks tried out for the United States Olympic hockey team heading to Squaw Valley, California. He made it through training camp, survived every cut, was on the roster. Then, 1 week before the Olympics, Coach Jack Riley called Brooks into his office and told him he was being cut to make room for 2 brothers from Boston, Bill and Bob Clary, who'd missed tryouts because they were starting a business. Brooks was devastated. That night, 11 of his teammates threatened to quit in protest, but Brooks told them to play, to win for the country. He went home to St. Paul and watched on television as the team he'd been cut from defeated the Soviet Union and won America's first Olympic hockey gold medal. Brooks never forgot that moment. The pain of being so close, of having his dream taken away at the last second, would fuel everything that came after. Brooks made the Olympic teams in 1964 and 1968, playing in both games but never winning a medal. He competed in 8 world championships between 1960 and 1970, becoming one of the most experienced American hockey players of his era. But he never won Olympic gold as a player. That failure, that incomplete dream, haunted him. When Brooks retired as a player in 1970, he tried selling insurance. He hated it. Lou Nanne, who'd played with Brooks on the 1968 Olympic team, helped recruit him to coaching, first with the Minnesota freshman team, then as head coach of the Golden Gophers in 1972. As a coach, Brooks was different from anyone in American hockey. Most American coaches in the 1970s taught a dump-and-chase style: shoot the puck deep, chase it, hit everything that moves, grind out victories through physical play and forechecking. Brooks studied the Soviet system, watching how they played with speed and passing, using the full width of the international ice rinks, creating intricate offensive patterns that resembled basketball more than traditional hockey. Brooks began implementing a hybrid system, combining Soviet-style speed and passing with North American physical play and forechecking. His practices were brutal. He believed conditioning was the foundation of everything. He worked with Jack Blatherwick, a physiologist who designed training programs that pushed players beyond what they thought possible. Players who'd played for Brooks at Minnesota remembered Monday practices that ended with exhausting skating drills that went on until players collapsed. Brooks would skate them until they vomited, then make them skate more. But it worked. Brooks led Minnesota to NCAA championships in 1974, 1976, and 1979. His teams were always in better shape than opponents, always faster in the third period when other teams were exhausted. By 1979, Brooks had established himself as the most successful college hockey coach in America. After the 1979 championship season, Brooks was offered the position of head coach for the 1980 United States Olympic hockey team. It was the opportunity he'd waited his entire life for, the chance to accomplish as a coach what he never achieved as a player, the chance to defeat the Soviets and win Olympic gold. Brooks accepted immediately.
The Soviet Union entered the 1980 Olympics as the most dominant team in hockey history. They'd won gold medals at the 1964, 1968, 1972, and 1976 Olympics. In those 4 Olympics, their record was 27 wins, 1 loss, and 1 tie, outscoring opponents 175-44. Against the United States specifically, the Soviets had gone 12-0 between 1960 and 1980, with a combined score of 117-26. The Soviet system was professional in all but name. Players were technically soldiers or workers, but their only job was playing hockey. They trained year-round, played together for years, developed chemistry and systems that American amateurs couldn't match. Their goaltender, Vladislav Tretiak, was considered the best in the world. Their coach, Viktor Tikhonov, was a dictatorial figure who controlled every aspect of his players' lives, demanding absolute obedience and perfection. The Soviet style was beautiful to watch. They'd play keep-away for minutes at a time, passing the puck in intricate patterns, moving it faster than defenders could react, creating opportunities that seemed to materialize from nothing. When they scored, it often came after 30-second possessions where the puck never touched an opponent's stick. Hockey purists called it the most aesthetically perfect hockey ever played. In 1979, the Soviet national team had defeated a team of NHL All-Stars 2-1 in the Challenge Cup. They'd beaten the best professional players in North America. The idea that amateur college kids could compete with them seemed absurd. The United States hockey program in 1980 was far behind. America had won 1 Olympic hockey gold medal in 1960, the same year Brooks was cut. They'd won 4 silver medals and 1 bronze across all previous Olympics. At the 1976 Olympics in Innsbruck, the Americans had finished 4th. American hockey was respectable but not elite, far behind Canada, the Soviet Union, Czechoslovakia, and Sweden. When Herb Brooks was named coach in 1979, he had 1 year to build a team that could somehow compete with the Soviets. His approach was radical for American hockey. He didn't pick the best individual players. He picked players who fit his system, who had the right mentality, who could skate fast enough to implement his hybrid style. Herb Brooks held a week-long tryout camp in Colorado Springs in July 1979, inviting over 70 players. He watched them obsessively, taking notes on everything: skating speed, hockey sense, coachability, work ethic, and attitude. He was looking for specific types of players: fast skaters, intelligent players who could think under pressure, team players who wouldn't quit when things got hard. His final roster of 20 players shocked the hockey world. Brooks left off some of the most talented American players because he didn't like their attitude or didn't think they fit his system. He chose 12 players from Minnesota, including 9 he'd coached at the University of Minnesota. This wasn't accident. Brooks knew these players intimately. He knew what buttons to push, what would motivate them, what would make them perform beyond their capabilities. The roster's average age was 22. Mike Eruzione, the team captain, was 25, playing in the International Hockey League for the Toledo Blades, a minor league team far below NHL caliber. Goaltender Jim Craig was 22 from Boston University. Mark Johnson, the most talented offensive player, was 22 from the University of Wisconsin. The youngest player, Neil Broughton, was 19 and still in college. These were kids playing against men who'd been training together professionally for a decade. Nobody gave them a chance. The hockey media wrote them off immediately. Even American fans didn't expect much. The team was seeded 7th out of 12 teams at the Olympics, meaning experts thought at least 6 other teams were better. The Soviet Union was seeded 1st, as expected. After selecting his roster in July 1979, Herb Brooks had until February 1980 to prepare his team, 7 months. He designed a training program more brutal than anything in American hockey history. The goal wasn't just teaching systems or improving skills. The goal was conditioning these players to be in better shape than the Soviets, to be able to maintain speed and execution for full 60-minute games when opponents were exhausted. Herb Brooks and Jack Blatherwick designed conditioning protocols based on interval training and explosive movements. Players did sprints on ice until their legs failed. They did off-ice training that built endurance and explosive power. They ran stairs, lifted weights, did cardiovascular training that left them gasping. But the most infamous aspect of Brooks's training camp were the Herbies. These were skating drills from end to end, whistle to whistle, with no breaks, continuing until Brooks decided the team had suffered enough. Players would skate from goal line to near blue line and back, then to center ice and back, then to far blue line and back, then to far goal line and back, over and over, dozens of repetitions. When players collapsed, Brooks made them continue. When players vomited, Brooks showed no sympathy. The Herbies were as much psychological torture as physical conditioning. Brooks used them as punishment for poor performances or lack of effort. After a mediocre exhibition game against Norway in September 1979, Brooks made the team do Herbies for over an hour until players literally couldn't stand. Some were crying, others were begging him to stop. Brooks kept blowing his whistle. When asked later why he did it, Brooks said he needed to know if they'd quit. Champions don't quit. If they quit during a skating drill, they'd quit during an Olympic game. Bill Baker and Mike Ramsey, both defensemen, later said the Herbies happened regularly at Minnesota when Brooks coached there. It was his standard training method, but doing it at the Olympic level with grown men who thought they were already in peak condition was shocking and brutal. Beyond conditioning, Brooks demanded his team learn his hybrid system perfectly. He wanted Soviet-style speed and passing combined with North American forechecking and physical play. He made them practice passing patterns for hours, moving the puck crisp and fast, always thinking 2 plays ahead. He emphasized skating with the puck, maintaining possession, controlling the tempo. Brooks also deliberately created psychological pressure. He refused to let players from rival colleges form friendships. Minnesota players and Boston players naturally gravitated towards each other.
Brooks broke up these cliques ruthlessly. He criticized players in front of the team, singling them out for mistakes. He played mind games, making players compete against each other for ice time and positions. Most controversially, Brooks made himself the enemy. He deliberately fostered an environment where players united against him rather than bonding naturally as teammates. Years later, players would say they hated Brooks during training camp. They thought he was cruel, unfair, irrational. But that hatred unified them. They stopped seeing each other as rivals from different colleges and started seeing each other as fellow sufferers under Brooks's tyranny. Brooks knew exactly what he was doing. He was creating team chemistry through shared adversity. The team played a 61-game exhibition schedule against college teams, minor league teams, and international opponents. On February 9, 1980, just 13 days before the Olympics, they played the Soviet Union at Madison Square Garden in New York. The Soviets destroyed them 10-3. It wasn't close. The Americans looked overmatched, slow, intimidated. Media coverage after the game was brutal. Columnists wondered if the Americans would win a single game at the Olympics. The exhibition proved what everyone already knew. The Soviets were on a different level. But Brooks saw something different in that game. His players weren't intimidated anymore. They'd been destroyed on the scoreboard, but they'd stood up to the Soviets physically, had some chances, showed they belonged on the same ice. Brooks told his team the score didn't matter. What mattered was they'd faced the monster and survived. In 2 weeks, they'd face them again, and the result would be different. The 1980 Winter Olympics opened February 13th in Lake Placid, New York, a small resort town in upstate New York that had previously hosted the 1932 Winter Olympics. The setting was perfect for hockey, with cold temperatures and genuine winter weather creating authentic Olympic atmosphere. The political context was impossible to ignore. The Cold War between the United States and Soviet Union was intensifying. On December 27, 1979, the Soviet Union had invaded Afghanistan, beginning a brutal conflict that would last a decade. President Jimmy Carter was considering boycotting the 1980 Summer Olympics, scheduled for Moscow, in retaliation. The Iran hostage crisis, where 52 Americans had been held captive in Tehran since November 1979, dominated news coverage daily. The American economy was struggling with high inflation and unemployment. National morale was low. The Olympic hockey tournament used a format where 12 teams were divided into 2 groups of 6. Each team played the other 5 teams in its group. The top 2 teams from each group advanced to a medal round where they'd play the top 2 from the other group in a round-robin format, carrying forward their results against the other qualifier from their group. The Americans were placed in the blue division with Czechoslovakia, Sweden, West Germany, Norway, and Romania. The Soviet Union was in the red division with Canada, Finland, Poland, Netherlands, and Japan. The Americans needed to finish in the top 2 of their group to have any chance at a medal. The Americans opened the tournament on February 12th against Sweden, one of the tournament favorites. The game was tied 2-2 late in the third period. With 27 seconds remaining, Bill Baker scored on a long shot that beat Swedish goaltender Pelle Lindberg. The Americans had stolen a 2-2 tie, earning 1 point in the standings. It was a confidence boost, proving they could compete with elite teams. 2 days later, they faced Czechoslovakia, another powerhouse team that had won silver at the 1976 Olympics. The Czechs were skilled, experienced, and physical. The game was brutal, with both teams playing aggressive defensive hockey. The Americans won 7-3, with 5 different players scoring goals. Brooks's system was working. His players were skating faster than opponents, maintaining possession, creating offensive chances through speed and passing rather than dump and chase. The Americans then beat Norway 5-1, Romania 7-2, and West Germany 4-2. They'd gone 4-0-1 in group play, finishing second in the blue division behind Sweden. They'd qualified for the medal round, which was more than most experts had predicted. But the real test was coming. The medal round featured 4 teams: United States and Sweden from the blue division, Soviet Union and Finland from the red division. Each team would play the 2 teams from the other division. The Americans had already played Sweden, so that result carried forward. They would play the Soviet Union and Finland. The Soviets had already destroyed Finland 4-2 in group play, so that result carried forward for them. The Soviets had been even more dominant than expected in group play. They'd outscored opponents 51-11 across 5 games. They'd beaten their most dangerous opponent, Canada, 6-4. They'd destroyed lesser teams like Japan 16-0 and Poland 8-1. Vladislav Tretiak had been brilliant in goal. The Soviet forwards had scored at will. They looked unstoppable. The Americans played Finland first on February 20th. The game was crucial. A loss would essentially eliminate them from medal contention. A win would set up the showdown with the Soviets on February 22nd with everything on the line. The Americans dominated Finland 4-2, with Phil Verchota, Steve Kristoff, Rob McClanahan, and Mark Johnson scoring goals. Jim Craig was outstanding in goal, making 32 saves. The win gave the Americans legitimate hope. They were now 5-0-1 in the tournament. One more win against the Soviets would likely give them the gold medal. February 22, 1980, dawned cold and clear in Lake Placid. The game was scheduled for 5 p.m. Eastern Time. ABC planned to broadcast it on tape delay at 8 p.m., assuming most Americans wouldn't be interested in watching live. This would prove to be a miscalculation. Word spread throughout the day that something special was happening at the Olympics. Bars and restaurants around America started filling up early, people wanting to watch together, to be part of whatever was about to happen. In the American locker room before the game, Herb Brooks stood before his team and delivered one of the most famous speeches in sports history. His voice was calm, controlled, but his words carried weight that came from 20 years of pursuing this moment.
Great moments are born from great opportunity, Brooks said. And that's what you have here tonight, boys. That's what you've earned here tonight. One game. If we played them 10 times, they might win 9, but not this game. Not tonight. Tonight, we skate with them. Tonight, we stay with them. And we shut them down because we can. Tonight, we are the greatest hockey team in the world. You were born to be hockey players, every one of you, and you were meant to be here tonight. This is your time. Their time is done. It's over. I'm sick and tired of hearing about what a great hockey team the Soviets have. This is your time. Now go out there and take it. The team took the ice for warm-ups. The Olympic Center arena was packed with 8,500 fans, almost all American, waving flags, chanting USA, USA. The atmosphere was electric, patriotic, emotional. The Americans could feel the crowd's energy, the hope, the desperate need for something to celebrate. The puck dropped at 5:05 p.m. The Soviets, as expected, came out aggressively, controlling possession, passing crisply, creating chances. Vladimir Krutov scored first at 9:12 of the first period, beating Jim Craig with a wrist shot. The Americans were down 1-0, exactly what everyone expected. But 5 minutes later, Buzz Schneider scored for the Americans, a quick shot that beat Tretiak. The game was tied 1-1. The Soviets responded quickly. Sergei Makarov scored to make it 2-1 Soviet Union with just seconds remaining in the first period. The Americans were deflated, skating to their bench when Mark Johnson intercepted a Soviet pass at center ice. With 5 seconds left in the period, Johnson broke in alone on Tretiak and scored to tie the game 2-2. The Americans went to the locker room tied with the greatest hockey team in the world. Soviet coach Viktor Tikhonov made a decision during the intermission that would haunt him forever. He benched Vladislav Tretiak, the best goaltender in the world, and put in backup Vladimir Myshkin. Tikhonov was angry that Tretiak had allowed 2 goals. He wanted to send a message about expectations and accountability. But removing Tretiak meant the Soviets no longer had their most important player on the ice. The second period was all Soviet Union. They dominated possession, created chances, put relentless pressure on Jim Craig. Alexander Maltsev scored at 2:18 of the second period to make it 3-2 Soviet Union. For the next 16 minutes, the Soviets attacked constantly. Craig made save after save, some of them spectacular, keeping the Americans within 1 goal. The Americans managed only 2 shots on goal in the entire second period. They were being outplayed badly, but they were still within reach. In the American locker room before the third period, Brooks told his team they had 20 minutes to accomplish something that would be remembered forever. "If you lose this game," Brooks said, "you'll take it to your grave. Your fucking grave." Then he walked out, leaving them to absorb that pressure. The third period began with the Soviets still controlling play, but something was changing. The Americans, conditioned by 7 months of Herbies by Brooks's brutal training camp, were still skating strong. The Soviets, used to teams wilting under their pressure, were starting to tire slightly. The Americans began creating more offensive zone time, getting more shots, making Myshkin work. At 8:39 of the third period, Mark Johnson scored his second goal of the game, banging in a rebound to tie the score 3-3. The Olympic Center exploded. The noise was deafening. Fans were screaming, crying, waving flags. The Americans were tied with the Soviets with 11 minutes left. Exactly 81 seconds later, at 10 o'clock of the third period, Mike Eruzione bought the puck at the left circle. He was 30 feet from the goal. Myshkin was screened by Soviet defenseman Sergei Starakov. Eruzione shot. The puck flew past Myshkin's glove and into the net. The Americans led 4-3. Eruzione threw his arms in the air, was mobbed by teammates. The crowd was in pandemonium. 10 minutes remained, the longest 10 minutes in American hockey history. The Soviets attacked desperately. They'd never lost an Olympic hockey game since 1968. They couldn't lose to American college kids. They fired shot after shot at Jim Craig. Craig stopped everything. One save, then another, then another. Some were routine, others were miraculous, with Craig diving across the crease, stretching to deflect shots that seemed destined for goals. The Americans tried to maintain possession, to run time off the clock. They iced the puck repeatedly, just trying to survive. Brooks was pacing behind the bench, watching the clock, unable to do anything but trust his players to execute. The seconds ticked down. 5 minutes left. 4 minutes. 3 minutes. With exactly 1 minute remaining, ABC announcer Al Michaels began his legendary call. His voice rose with emotion as the seconds disappeared. 11 seconds. You've got 10 seconds. The countdown going on right now. Morrow, up to Silk. 5 seconds left in the game. Do you believe in miracles? Yes! The horn sounded. The Americans had won 4-3. Players threw their sticks in the air and piled on each other at center ice. Jim Craig, who'd made 36 saves, wrapped himself in an American flag and skated around the rink looking for his father in the stands. The crowd was delirious, celebrating not just a hockey game, but something that transcended sports. The win over the Soviet Union didn't guarantee gold. The Americans still had to play Finland 2 days later on February 24th. If they lost, Sweden could win gold. The game was anticlimactic after the Soviet victory, but the Americans couldn't let them down. They fell behind 2-1 in the first period, and the dream seemed to be slipping away. But Brooks reminded them between periods that they hadn't come this far to fail now. The Americans scored 3 goals in the third period, with Phil Verchota, Rob McClanahan, and Mark Johnson finding the net. They won 4-2, clinching the gold medal. When the final horn sounded, the celebration was even more emotional than after the Soviet game. They'd completed the impossible journey. The medal ceremony was held immediately after the Finland game. As the American players stood on the podium and the national anthem played, many were crying. Mike Eruzione, as captain, received the gold medal first, then called all his teammates onto the top podium step with him. They stood together, 20 young men who'd accomplished something that would be remembered for generations.
The cultural impact was immediate and enormous. ABC's tape-delayed broadcast drew the largest television audience ever for a hockey game in America. The game was replayed constantly on television. Sports Illustrated put the team on the cover with the headline, "A Reminder of What We Can Be." President Carter invited the team to the White House, telling them they'd made Americans feel good about themselves. The victory came at a moment when America desperately needed something to celebrate. The Iran hostage crisis continued. The economy was struggling. The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan had increased Cold War tensions. Many Americans felt the country was in decline, that America's best days were behind it. The hockey team's victory over the Soviets provided a symbolic moment, proof that Americans could still accomplish great things against overwhelming odds. The term "miracle on ice" was coined almost immediately. Sports Illustrated's cover story used the phrase, and it stuck. In 1999, Sports Illustrated named the victory the greatest sports moment of the 20th century, ahead of Muhammad Ali lighting the Olympic torch, Jesse Owens winning 4 gold medals in Berlin, and every other iconic moment in sports history. For the individual players, life changed dramatically. Most went on to professional careers in the NHL, though few became stars. Mike Eruzione never played professionally, choosing instead to capitalize on his Olympic fame through speaking engagements and endorsements. Jim Craig had a brief NHL career with the Atlanta Flames, Boston Bruins, and Minnesota North Stars, but never achieved the success his Olympic performance suggested. Mark Johnson had the most successful NHL career, playing for several teams over 11 seasons before becoming a successful college coach. Herb Brooks had accomplished as a coach what he'd never achieved as a player. He defeated the Soviets and won Olympic gold. But the victory didn't bring him peace. In interviews after 1980, Brooks often seemed uncomfortable with the attention, almost guilty that he'd succeeded where so many others had failed. He went on to coach in the NHL for the New York Rangers, Minnesota North Stars, New Jersey Devils, and Pittsburgh Penguins, compiling a respectable but not spectacular record. Brooks returned to Olympic coaching in 2002, leading the United States men's hockey team to the silver medal at the Salt Lake City Games. On August 11, 2003, Brooks was killed in a single-car accident near Forest Lake, Minnesota. He was 66 years old. He'd fallen asleep at the wheel, his car veering off the highway and rolling. He wasn't wearing a seatbelt. The news devastated the hockey community and the players from 1980, who credited Brooks with changing their lives. The players from the 1980 team remained close throughout their lives, reuniting regularly for anniversaries of the victory. In 2004, the film Miracle dramatized the team's story, with Kurt Russell playing Herb Brooks. The film was generally praised for its accuracy and for capturing Brooks's complex personality. The real players appeared as extras in the film, skating in crowd scenes. In 2019, during the team's 40th anniversary celebration, every living member of the team gathered in Las Vegas. Mike Eruzione spoke about what the victory meant. Quote, "It represented everything that was good about America at a time when people needed to feel good about America. We were just 20 kids playing hockey, but we became something bigger than ourselves." The question of whether the 1980 victory was truly a miracle or simply an upset has been debated for 45 years. Statistically, the Soviets were overwhelming favorites. They'd won 4 straight Olympic gold medals, had beaten NHL All-Stars, and had destroyed the Americans 10-3 just weeks before the Olympics. By any objective measure, the Americans had no chance. But the Americans did have advantages that weren't obvious. They were better conditioned than the Soviets, thanks to Brooks's brutal training camp. They were playing at home, with a passionately supportive crowd. They had youth and motivation, while the Soviets were complacent, expecting another easy victory. Jim Craig played the game of his life in goal, and the Americans executed their game plan perfectly, maintaining speed and possession, never panicking when they fell behind. Was it a miracle? Or was it the result of superior preparation, perfect execution, and a few lucky bounces? The answer is probably both. The Americans needed everything to go right, and it did. That's what makes the story so compelling 45 years later. The lasting impact extends beyond hockey. The victory has been used as a metaphor for overcoming impossible odds in business, politics, personal challenges. The phrase, "Do you believe in miracles?" has become part of American culture, referenced in context having nothing to do with hockey. The 1980 team represents the possibility that underdogs can win, that preparation and belief can overcome superior talent and resources. For Herb Brooks, the victory was vindication for being cut in 1960. He'd promised himself he'd never let that feeling of incompleteness define him. On February 22, 1980, he achieved something even greater than winning as a player. He created a team that accomplished the impossible, that united a country, that proved miracles can happen when preparation meets opportunity. 20 college kids, average age 22, defeated the greatest hockey team in history. They did it because their coach made them hate him, pushed them beyond their limits, and refused to let them quit. They did it because they were better conditioned than anyone expected. They did it because they believed they could, even when nobody else did. When the horn sounded and Al Michaels asked, "Do you believe in miracles?" the answer was obvious to everyone watching. Yes, because they'd just seen one.